You ever have one of those moments where life kind of throws irony right in someone's face, and all you gotta do is step back and let it happen? Yeah, this is one of those stories. It starts with a storm, but trust me, the real thunder rolled in long before the first drop of rain. It was early October when things got interesting. I remember standing at my kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the trees start to sway like they knew something we didn't. The wind had that low hum, that freight train whisper, like a warning just under the surface. Then, one by one, my neighbors started darting across their yards like it was a game of tag, and a tornado was it. And where were they all headed? Right to my backyard, to that structure. The one I spent 6 months defending like a damn hill in a battlefield. The one everyone, especially her, called an eyesore. And leading the charge, no surprise, was Cheryl Adams, HOA president, self-appointed design czar, and full-time pain in the... Well, you get it. She was a sight, man. Hair plastered to her head, heels sinking into the mud, makeup streaked like a melting wax figure. Cheryl had spent the better part of half a year trying to get my shed torn down. Wrote me up, fined me, called meetings just to humiliate me. And now? She was pounding on the door of the very structure she'd tried to erase, screaming to be let in. Thing is, I didn't build a shed. My name's Mark Wallace, retired structural engineer. Moved to Silver Pines a few years ago after a long career designing buildings to stand up to earthquakes, hurricanes, and, well, people like Cheryl. I wanted peace, quiet, maybe start a little garden, get into woodworking. But what I got instead was an HOA with a god complex and a president who thought she was the sheriff in a town that didn't need policing. When I built that structure, it wasn't some impulse Home Depot weekend project. I'd studied the flood maps, the wind patterns, the emergency preparedness, or lack thereof, of this neighborhood. And what I found scared me more than any storm ever could. The designated shelter? The community clubhouse? It was barely up to code for bingo night. No backup generator, no emergency supplies, no reinforced anything. So I did what I knew how to do. I built a proper shelter. Looked like a big tool shed from the outside. Beige to match my house, 12 by 16 feet, nothing flashy. Pulled permits. Passed inspections, checked every box. But none of that mattered to Cheryl. She started with letters passive-aggressive at first. Claimed I violated the design harmony clause, whatever that meant. When I sent her the permits and a copy of the inspection, she pivoted. Said it was too tall, too long, wrong shade of beige. I held the color swatches up myself. It matched, down to the hex code. Then came the fines. $50 at first, then 100, then 2. Every envelope came with a little more venom. She started bringing it up at HOA meetings, calling it a blot on the landscape, saying it threatened property values. This isn't a junkyard, she'd say with a smug little laugh. We have standards. And every time, I sat there, back row, quiet, listening, watching, not saying a word, because Cheryl didn't know what I knew. She didn't know that inside that shed were steel-reinforced walls, a battery backup system, stored food, water, medical supplies, 20 folding cots, a weather radio, and a generator that could run for 5 days straight. It was FEMA certified. It could save lives. That was the point. And then the storm came. The National Weather Service had been tracking it for days, but people didn't really take it seriously until about 3 p.m. when they upgraded it to a Category 2, possibly Category 3, with 90 miles per hour winds and flash flood potential. And wouldn't you know it, our beloved clubhouse, the so-called shelter Cheryl always pointed to, closed for renovations. Half the roof was gone. Contractor had it ripped off the week before to replace the trusses. No one had thought to pause construction when the weather reports started looking grim. And Cheryl? She'd signed off on the project herself. At 5:17 p.m., with wind-lifting lawn chairs and trash bins from one yard to another, I walked out to my shelter, unlocked the reinforced steel door, and flipped on the power. Soft LED lights lit up the interior like a sci-fi bunker. I had everything in place. It was time. The first knock came less than 2 minutes later. Evelyn Jones, sweet woman in her late 70s, lived 2 doors down. Her hands were shaking, hair soaked, glasses fogged. "Mark, is that? Can I come in?" "Of course," I said, guiding her inside. And then came the flood, not of water, not yet, but of people. The Millers with their twins, the Garcias and their golden retriever, even the Tran family, who barely spoke to anyone, showed up carrying their baby wrapped in a towel. It was a scene, let me tell you. I stood at the door like a bouncer at a VIP club, except instead of checking IDs, I was making sure people had dry blankets and water bottles. We filled every cot, every bench. Kids curled up on bean bags I'd thrown in as an afterthought. Adults huddled quietly, checking their phones, whispering updates. And then, Cheryl showed up. She stood at the edge of the patio, looking like a wreck out of a fashion magazine disaster shoot. Her heels were gone. One earring missing, mascara making raccoon circles around her eyes. For a second, she just stood there, watching. I think she was hoping someone else would let her in so she didn't have to ask me. But they were all inside now, warm, dry, silent. She stepped forward. Just 2 steps. Then another. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "Is there room?" I looked at her. I really did. I took a long moment to let it all sink in. The 6 months of letters, the fines, the accusations, the way she made me out to be some kind of menace. And then I stepped aside and nodded. She didn't say thank you. Just walked in like a ghost and took the only empty spot left, next to little Naomi Garcia, who offered her a granola bar like it was no big deal. Then, the question came. Out of nowhere, from the back of the room, little Jake Miller, maybe 8 years old, looks up at her and goes, "Mrs. Adams, why do you want Mr. Wallace to tear this place down?" Dead silence. Cheryl opened her mouth, closed it again. Everyone turned. Every single person in that shelter. Finally, she muttered, "I didn't know it was. I thought it was just." "You thought it was just ugly," said Hector Garcia, not even looking up from his phone. You could hear the wind slam against the walls just then, like nature itself was punctuating the moment. What followed was cathartic, I guess. People started talking, quiet at first, then louder, about how she'd harassed them, too. About the time she made the Jeffersons repaint their fence, or fine the O'Malleys for having a flag that was too large. And all the while, Cheryl just sat there, water dripping from her soaked blazer, shrinking in her seat like a balloon losing air. Then Evelyn, who hadn't said a word since she came in, just looked at her and said, "You tried to destroy the one thing that saved us all. You should be ashamed." I didn't need to say anything. The room had spoken. Around midnight, after the worst of the storm had passed and most of the kids were asleep, I found myself at the front of the shelter, watching the backup power hum quietly. And I said something I hadn't planned on saying. I built this after my cousin's house got wiped out in Hurricane Harvey. They had no shelter, nowhere to go. I promised myself, never again. Not for the people I live near. Not if I could help it. The next morning, we walked out into a mess. Trees down, fences torn apart, shingles everywhere. The clubhouse? Half collapsed. Cheryl's backyard pergola? In a neighbor's pool. And that afternoon, the board held an emergency meeting at the Garcia house. I wasn't invited, but Hector filled me in. Unanimous vote. All my fines were reversed, refunded in full. A formal apology drafted and signed. Cheryl? Removed as HOA president. Effective immediately. 3 weeks later, her house went on the market. I never spoke to her again. But the best part? 2 months after the storm, a federal inspector showed up, walked through my shelter with a clipboard and a smile, and told me, "This is better than most municipal shelters I've seen." And when he bolted that brass plaque to the door that read Community Emergency Shelter, FEMA certified, well, let's just say Evelyn brought out lemonade and we all toasted in the driveway like it was the 4th of July. Cheryl drove past that afternoon, slowed down, saw the plaque. I don't think she'll ever forget it. So here's my question for you. What do you think? Was I right to stay quiet and let the shelter speak for itself? Or should I have pushed back harder from the start? Ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA like this? Drop your stories in the comments. I read every single one. And hey, if you've got a neighbor who thinks their clipboard gives them a crown, maybe it's time to build a shed or something stronger.